Blood is thicker than water, but it's also a hell of a lot stickier. My sister spent her entire life trying to shrink me, so when she bragged that her new fiancé's father was a federal judge, I just nodded. I didn't mention I was one too. My chambers smelled like stale floor wax, cooling espresso, and the sharp, metallic tang of cheap radiator heat. It was 6:30 on a Thursday evening, and the courthouse was dead quiet, save for the hum of the HVAC unit rattling behind the drywall. I was rubbing the bridge of my nose, staring down at a motion to suppress evidence that read like it had been drafted by a sleep-deprived law student, when my phone vibrated against the mahogany desk. The screen flashed, "Chloe." I let it buzz 3 times. I always did. You have to brace yourself for my sister. A conversation with Chloe isn't a dialogue. It's an audit of your life choices, wrapped in weaponized enthusiasm. I picked up, hitting speakerphone. "Hey, Chloe," he asked me. Her voice was pitchy, a dog whistle frequency that immediately made the dull ache behind my left eye throb. "Preston?" I asked, leaning back in my leather chair. It squeaked, a high, pathetic sound. "Wow. Congratulations. It's a 3-carat cushion cut, Becca. Platinum band. Hidden halo. I'm literally shaking right now." I heard the clinking of glass in the background, a celebration already underway. But that's not even the best part. I mean, it is, but listen to this. We're doing a family dinner on Saturday to celebrate. You have to come. You have to. Saturday. I have a stack of briefs to read, Chloe. Becca, please. The tone shifted, dipping into that manufactured pout she'd perfected when we were 7. It's my engagement. Plus, you actually might have something in common with his family for once. Preston's dad is Arthur Kensington. He's a federal judge. She hit the words federal judge with the reverence most people reserve for deities or lottery numbers. Arthur Kensington, I repeated. The name was heavy. Real. I knew Arthur. He was on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, a brilliant jurist, a brutal interrogator during oral arguments. He had authored a scathing dissent 2 months ago that I had taped to the wall of my break room because it was so flawlessly written. "Yes," Chloe squealed, entirely misreading my tone as awe, like a real one, appointed by the president and everything. Preston says his dad basically runs the district. He's super intimidating. I told Preston you work in the court system too, so you guys can talk about whatever it is you do. Paperwork? Filing? A small, cynical laugh hitched in my throat. I swallowed it. Right. Filing. My sister didn't know I was a judge. That sounds impossible, I know. But you have to understand the geography of our family. Chloe was the sun, and the rest of us were just tired planets stuck in her orbit. When I graduated from law school, she was busy launching a lifestyle blog that failed 6 months later. When I made partner at my firm, she was in the middle of a messy, highly publicized divorce from a minor league baseball player. And 2 years ago, when the Senate confirmed my appointment to the federal bench, making me the youngest district judge in the circuit, Chloe was on a yoga retreat in Bali, strictly, completely unplugged from toxic modern society. My parents knew, of course, but they were deeply intimidated by my career, finding it much easier to talk to Chloe about her latest juice cleanse than to ask me about the constitutionality of civil asset forfeitures. Over time, I just stopped correcting Chloe. It was easier. She liked me better when she thought she was winning. If she knew I wore the black robe, she'd find a way to make it a personal attack on her. "Dinner is at 7, Chloe pressed on. "Marcel's downtown. Wear something nice, Becca. Preston's family is old money. Don't show up in those depressing gray pantsuits you always wear." "I'll see you Saturday, Chloe." I hung up before she could list any more of my wardrobe deficiencies. I sat there in the quiet of my chambers. I looked at the black robe hanging on the brass hook behind my door. The fabric looked heavy. It felt heavy, too. I was 36, completely single, chronically exhausted, and I survived mostly on Diet Coke and sheer, stubborn spite. I closed the brief on my desk, the paper rough against my fingertips. Saturday at Marcel's. I already knew the menu was overpriced, the lighting would be terrible, and I was going to need a very stiff drink. Saturday night smelled like wet asphalt and expensive exhaust. It was raining, a cold, miserable drizzle that clung to the collar of my wool trench coat. I handed my keys to a valet who looked barely old enough to have a learner's permit, feeling the damp chill seep into my bones. Marcel's was one of those places that mistook darkness for ambiance. The air was thick with the scent of roasted garlic, truffle oil, and an overwhelming wave of Tom Ford cologne as I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The hostess led me to a semi-private alcove in the back. I saw them before they saw me. Chloe was holding her left hand up to the candlelight, angling the massive diamond so it fractured the dim room. Preston sat beside her. He was exactly the kind of man I sentenced in corporate fraud cases. Slicked back hair, a cashmere sweater layered perfectly over a collared shirt, and a posture that screamed he had never been told no in his entire 30-something years on Earth. "Becca!" Chloe spotted me. She didn't stand up. She just waved me over with her ring hand. I slid into the booth across from them. The leather was cold against the back of my thighs. "Congratulations, Chloe." "Preston." "Thanks." Preston offered a smile that involved only his teeth. His handshake was practiced firm, but brief. "Chloe's told me so much about you. The workaholic sister." "She's so sweet to come out," Chloe chimed in, leaning her head on Preston's shoulder. "I know she hates restaurants like this. Becca's more of a diner girl, you know?" I picked up the heavy linen napkin, the starch stiff against my skin, and laid it across my lap. A good diner has its merits. "So Rebecca," Preston said, resting his forearms on the table. He leaned in, adopting a tone he probably thought was magnanimous. "Chloe tells me you work down at the federal courthouse." "I do. Tough gig. Government work. The bureaucracy must be soul-crushing," he chuckled, signaling the waiter for a bottle of wine. "My old man is Arthur Kensington. You've probably heard the name floating around the clerk's office." "The name is familiar," I said smoothly. I reached for a piece of sourdough from the bread basket. The crust was sharp, biting the roof of my mouth as I chewed. "He's a senior judge on the appellate court," Preston clarified, speaking slowly, as if translating complex concepts for a child. "It's a massive responsibility. He basically oversees the entire judicial district. The judges you work for, they answer to him." Technically, that wasn't how the appellate system worked. District judges don't answer to appellate judges like middle managers reporting to a regional director. They review our rulings for errors of law. But I wasn't about to teach civics 101 over a $24 breadbasket. "That must keep him busy," I murmured. "Oh, it does. He's held up right now, actually, drafting a major opinion," Mom texted, saying they'd be about 20 minutes late. Preston swirled the dark red wine the waiter had just poured. "You know, if you ever want to move up from whatever administrative thing you're doing now, I could probably drop a word to him. He knows all the big shot judges down there. Could probably get you a cushy paralegal spot, or a clerkship if you went to law school." I stopped chewing. I looked at Preston. His eyes were perfectly blank, completely void of irony. He truly believed he was being generous. Beside him, Chloe was nodding enthusiastically. "That would be amazing, babe. Becca, you should take him up on that. You've been stuck in the same government job for years. It's time for a pivot." A laugh clawed at my throat. It felt jagged and hot. I took a sip of my water instead. The ice clinked against the crystal glass, a sharp, ringing sound in the quiet alcove. "I appreciate the offer, Preston," I said, my voice dangerously level. "But I'm actually pretty satisfied with my current position." Preston shrugged, taking a long sip of his wine. "Suit yourself. Just offering a lifeline. It's a competitive world out there. Connections are everything." The waiter arrived with appetizers, beef tartare, and some sort of foam-covered scallop. The conversation shifted to their wedding plans. Lake Como, a guest list of 400. Chloe dominated the airwaves, dissecting floral arrangements and dress silhouettes while I focused on slicing my scallop into microscopic pieces. Every few minutes, Chloe would lob a thinly veiled grenade in my direction. "I told the wedding planner we want an open bar," she said, dabbing her mouth. "Becca, you should pace yourself tonight. Remember how you got at Aunt Susan's funeral?" I hadn't been drunk at Aunt Susan's funeral. I had been crying because Susan practically raised us while our parents worked, and I happened to be holding a glass of cheap Chardonnay at the time. "I'll be fine, Chloe." "I'm just saying," she hummed. "We're trying to make a good impression tonight. Arthur is very traditional. He commands respect. Just let Preston do the talking when they get here." I felt the familiar, heavy fatigue settle into my shoulders. It was the same exhaustion I felt after a 10-hour suppression hearing with 2 combative attorneys. The deep, marrow-level weariness of dealing with people who refuse to see reality. I looked at the doorway. I wanted to go home. I wanted to take off these uncomfortable heels, put on sweatpants, and watch trashy reality television until my brain turned to static. "They're here," Preston suddenly said, sitting up straighter. He adjusted his collar. I turned my head. The maitre d' was parting the sea of tables, leading an older couple toward our alcove. Arthur Kensington looked exactly as he did in his official portrait, though a bit more weathered. He was a tall man, imposing not because of his physical bulk, but because of his posture. He walked like a man accustomed to people stepping out of his way. He wore a charcoal suit that was impeccably tailored, and his silver hair was neatly trimmed. Beside him was a petite woman in a muted navy dress, a single strand of real pearls resting against her collarbone. I felt a sudden, bizarre spike of adrenaline. A cold sweat prickled at the nape of my neck. I realized, with a sudden sinking feeling, that I hadn't thought this through. I had assumed in my exhaustion that I could just sit quietly, eat my overcooked steak, and slip out into the night. But Arthur wasn't some distant relative or a forgetful old man. He was sharp as a scalpel. "Dad, Mom." Preston stood up, his entire demeanor shifting from smug aristocrat to eager-to-please golden retriever. He stepped out of the booth to hug his mother and shake his father's hand. Chloe practically leaped to her feet, smoothing down her silk dress. "Mr. Kensington, Mrs. Kensington, it is so wonderful to finally meet you." "Chloe, dear," Mrs. Kensington said, her voice soft and cultured. "We are thrilled. The ring is beautiful." Arthur offered a polite, practiced smile. "A pleasure, Chloe. Preston has told us quite a bit about you." His eyes swept over the table, assessing the room with the habitual gaze of a man used to surveying a courtroom. Then, his eyes landed on me. I was still sitting. I had frozen halfway through the motion of reaching for my water glass. For a second, the ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking silverware, the dull roar of 100 separate conversations, the soft jazz playing over the speakers seemed to mute itself. Arthur stopped moving. The polite, patriarchal smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of profound, calculating shock. His gray eyes narrowed, scanning my face, dropping to my posture, then darting back up to my eyes, as if running me through an internal database. Preston, oblivious to the sudden drop in barometric pressure at the table, gestured toward me. "Dad, Mom, this is Chloe's older sister, Rebecca. She works down at the federal courthouse, too. I was just telling her that maybe you could introduce her to some of the clerks, help her out with her career." Chloe giggled nervously. "Yes, she's just an administrator, but she works very hard." Arthur didn't look at Preston. He didn't look at Chloe. He kept his eyes locked firmly on mine. I saw the exact moment the gears caught. I saw the recognition flash bright and undeniable. 3 months ago, I had sat across from Arthur Kensington at a closed-door judicial conference in Chicago. We had fiercely debated the interpretation of the Fourth Amendment regarding digital privacy. I had pushed back against his conservative reading, and after a grueling 2-hour session, he had conceded my point, offering a rare nod of respect. He knew exactly who I was. The silence stretched. It was thick, heavy, and incredibly uncomfortable. I could smell the sharp peppermint of the breath mint Arthur must have just chewed, mixed with the faint, metallic scent of the damp rain on his suit jacket. "Dad?" Preston asked, his brow furrowing. "Are you okay?" Arthur Kensington finally moved. He bypassed his son entirely. He stepped around the corner of the heavy oak table, moving with a deliberate, solemn grace. He stopped right in front of where I sat. I slowly stood up. My knees popped slightly, a quiet, betraying sound. I smoothed down the front of my dress. Arthur extended his right hand. Not the dismissive, limp handshake Preston had offered. A firm, respectful offer of parity. Judge Hayes, Arthur said. His voice was a rich baritone, carrying effortlessly over the low hum of the restaurant. I took his hand. His grip was warm and dry. Judge Kensington, it's good to see you again. Arthur tilted his head slightly, a gesture of deference that made the hair on my arms stand up. I had no idea this was your family. I was just reading your opinion on the Vasquez summary judgment this morning. Brilliant legal reasoning. Truly. You threaded a very difficult needle. Thank you, I said, my voice feeling strangely hollow. It was a complex docket. Indeed. Arthur finally let go of my hand. He looked at me for another long second, a faint, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. Then he added, loud enough for the entire table to hear with crystal clarity, "It is an honor to share a table with you, Your Honor." The words hung in the air. Your Honor. I didn't look at Chloe or Preston immediately. I didn't want to. I focused on the rough texture of the linen napkin still gripped in my left hand. I felt a tight knot in my chest loosen, replaced by a strange, heavy dread. The dam had broken. When I finally shifted my gaze, the scene was catastrophic. Preston looked like he had been physically struck. The smug arrogance had drained entirely from his face, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed mask of total incomprehension. He looked from his father to me, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. But it was Chloe who broke my heart, just a little. She was staring at me. Her eyes were wide, the perfectly applied mascara making them look almost cartoonish. Her face had flushed a deep, blotchy crimson. The hand wearing the 3-carat diamond was hovering near her collarbone, trembling slightly. She looked at Arthur, then at me, her brain desperately trying to reconcile the sister she had bullied and belittled for 30 years with the woman a revered federal appeals judge had just called Your Honor. I'm sorry, Preston stammered, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a panicked rush. Dad, what did you just say? Administrator. Arthur turned to his son. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by the freezing judicial stare that terrified attorneys across 3 states. Preston, Arthur said, his voice dangerously soft. Did you seriously just introduce the Honorable Rebecca Hayes, an Article 3 federal judge appointed by the President of the United States as an administrator? Preston swallowed hard. The sound was audible. Chloe said. Chloe shrank back, her shoulders curling inward. The fierce, competitive light that usually burned in her eyes had been completely extinguished. I sat back down. I reached for my wine glass, feeling the cool, condensation-slicked crystal against my fingertips. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The wine tasted like ash and victory, and I suddenly wished, more than anything, that I was back in my quiet, badly lit chambers. Silence at a dinner table has a distinct weight. It isn't empty. It's a physical pressure that pushes against your eardrums and settles heavy in your lungs. Arthur Kensington remained standing for a long moment, the architecture of his face shifting as he processed the profound stupidity of his own son. The ambient noise of Marcel's seemed to dial back up, a sudden rush of clattering silverware and overlapping conversations, but inside our alcove, the air was stagnant. Diane Kensington, Arthur's wife, was the first to move. Decades of navigating high society social disasters had equipped her with the reflexes of a combat medic. She slid into the booth next to Arthur, her smile tight but flawlessly polite. Well, Diane said, her voice a soothing, modulated hum that cut through the tension. It seems we have 2 brilliant legal minds at the table tonight. Preston, darling, you must have misunderstood Chloe. The federal system is terribly confusing for lay people. She offered her son a lifeline, a desperate, fraying rope to pull himself out of the crater he had just dug. Preston grabbed it, though clumsily. A blotchy, uneven flush had crept up his neck, staining the collar of his expensive shirt. Right. Yeah, I must have mixed it up. You know how it is. Administrative, judicial, so much jargon. He offered a weak, rattling laugh. Nobody joined him. There is a rather significant chasm between a filing clerk and an Article 3 judge, Preston, Arthur noted dryly. He didn't look at his son. He was looking at me, his eyes sharp and assessing. He picked up his linen napkin, snapping it open with a sharp crack that made Chloe physically flinch. Judge Hayes's appointment was quite the topic of discussion on the circuit. Youngest on the district bench. A notoriously grueling confirmation hearing. It was a challenging month, I said. My voice sounded remarkably steady, completely disconnected from the frantic, erratic thumping of my heart. I picked up my fork, pressing the tines into the white tablecloth just to feel the resistance. I watched the Judiciary Committee feed, Arthur continued, leaning forward. The appetizer plates were cleared, but he ignored the waiter entirely. You didn't give an inch on the Benson precedent. It was a calculated risk, telling a sitting senator his interpretation of interstate commerce was fundamentally flawed. He was quoting a dissenting opinion as binding law, Judge Kensington, I replied. I felt it was important to clarify the record. Politely, of course. A genuine booming laugh erupted from Arthur's chest. It was a startling sound, rich and warm, completely at odds with his terrifying reputation. Politely. Yes. You practically filleted the man with a butter knife. It was magnificent television. I offered a small, measured smile. I should have felt triumphant. This was the ultimate vindication. For years, I had sat quietly while my sister and her rotating cast of partners diminished me, condescended to me, and treated my life like a cautionary tale. Now, the patriarch of the family she was so desperately trying to impress was practically rolling out a red carpet for me. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick. I glanced across the table. Chloe had shrunk. The vibrant, demanding energy that usually radiated from her had collapsed inward. She was staring down at her water glass, her knuckles bone white as she gripped the stem. The massive cushion-cut diamond caught the candlelight, but it looked less like a trophy now and more like a heavy, absurd shackle. Preston was glaring at his phone, his jaw tight, entirely shut out of the conversation. The power dynamic had violently inverted, and he lacked the grace or the intellect to navigate it. The main courses arrived. A flurry of waiters set down plates of filet mignon, roasted sea bass, and truffle risotto. The smell of seared meat and rich butter hit my stomach like a stone. I picked up my steak knife. The handle was cold steel. "So, Rebecca," Diane said, gently trying to steer the ship away from the rocky shores of jurisprudence. "Chloe tells us you're... Well, I suppose she hasn't told us much about your personal life. Are you seeing anyone?" It was a classic deflection, retreating to the safe, traditional metrics of a woman's worth. "No," I said, slicing into my steak. The meat was perfectly medium rare, bleeding slightly onto the white porcelain. Between the docket and the travel, there isn't much time. "It requires a unique partner to understand the demands of the bench," Arthur interjected, pausing with his wine glass halfway to his mouth. "The isolation is the hardest part. People who aren't in it simply don't understand the weight of the decisions. You hold people's liberty in your hands. It changes how you interact with the world." He was right. God, he was right. It was the truest thing anyone had said all night. The robe was a barrier. It demanded an emotional distance that bled into my personal life. I couldn't just have a casual beer at a local dive bar without worrying about running into a defendant I'd sentenced. I couldn't complain about a bad day without someone reminding me of my privilege. "It does," I agreed softly. I looked at Arthur, dropping the polite facade for a fraction of a second. "It gets very quiet." Arthur nodded slowly, a profound, silent understanding passing between us. In a room full of people, we were the only two speaking the same language. "Well?" Chloe suddenly spoke. Her voice was brittle, pitching dangerously high. "It's a good thing you've always liked being alone, Becca." The silence slammed back down over the table. It was a petty, venomous little strike, a reflex, a wounded animal snapping its jaws. Diane blinked, her polite smile faltering. Preston looked at his fiancé, as if she had just pulled the pin out of a grenade. Arthur's eyes cooled instantly, shifting from warm collegiality to a flat, judging stare. "Chloe," Preston hissed under his breath. "What?" Chloe challenged, her chin tilting up defensively. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears of pure, concentrated humiliation. It's true. She's always been independent. She never needed anybody. I chewed my steak. It tasted like ash. I swallowed, taking a slow sip of my wine to clear the dry, metallic taste from my mouth. I could have destroyed her right then. I could have looked at Arthur, raised an eyebrow, and let him draw his own conclusions about the woman his son was marrying. I had the high ground, but blood is sticky. And despite everything, she was the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms because she was afraid the sky was breaking. I am independent, I said evenly, keeping my eyes fixed on my plate. But no one gets anywhere entirely alone. Chloe actually helped me pick out my suits for my confirmation hearings. I was hopeless with the tailoring. The press ended up praising my impeccable presentation. That was all her. It was a lie. I had bought 3 identical gray suits off the rack at Nordstrom and had my clerk drop them at a dry cleaner. Chloe hadn't even known the hearings were happening, but I offered the lie smoothly, without a trace of hesitation. Diane immediately seized the lifeline. "Oh, how wonderful. You do have a marvelous eye for fashion, Chloe. Your dress tonight is simply stunning." Chloe stared at me. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly. She knew it was a lie. She knew I was throwing myself on the grenade for her, and I could see in her eyes that she hated me for it. She hated that she needed my protection. The rest of the dinner was an agonizing march through forced pleasantries. Arthur stopped talking about the law, shifting instead to a dry, unenthusiastic discussion about the logistics of the Lake Como wedding. Preston drank 3 glasses of wine in rapid succession, his arrogant swagger replaced by a sullen, brooding silence. I ate exactly half of my steak, drank 2 glasses of water, and counted the minutes until the plates were cleared. When the waiter finally brought the leather checkbook, Arthur reached for it before Preston could even flinch. "My treat," Arthur said, pulling a heavy black card from his wallet. He looked at me. "Judge Hayes, it has been an unexpected pleasure. I am presenting a lecture at the university next month on the evolution of privacy torts. I would be honored if you would attend as my guest." It wasn't just an invitation. It was an endorsement, a key to the inner circle. "I would be honored, Arthur. Thank you." We all stood up. The physical act of leaving the booth felt like shedding a physical weight. My joints ached. My head throbbed with the dull, persistent rhythm of an impending migraine. As we walked toward the front of the restaurant, Preston and his parents walked a few paces ahead. Chloe fell into step beside me. She didn't look at me. The smell of her expensive floral perfume was cloying, mixing with the damp scent of the coats the hostess was handing back to us. We stepped out into the night. The rain had escalated from a miserable drizzle to a steady, freezing downpour. The streetlights bled across the slick black asphalt in neon streaks of red and gold. The valet stand was chaotic, a crush of wealthy patrons trying to escape the cold. Arthur and Diane turned to say their goodbyes under the heavy canvas awning of the restaurant. "Safe travels back to your hotel," I said, shaking Arthur's hand once more. "And you, Rebecca," Diane said softly, touching my arm. Her eyes lingered on my face for a second longer than necessary. She knew exactly what had happened tonight. She was married to power. She understood the collateral damage it caused. "Take care of yourself." Preston gave me a stiff, humiliated nod. "See ya, Rebecca." "Good night, Preston." The Kensingtons climbed into a sleek black town car. The heavy doors thudded shut, sealing them inside, and the car slid away into the rainy traffic, leaving Chloe and me standing in the damp, freezing air. My car was going to take at least 10 minutes. I pulled the collar of my wool trench coat tighter against my neck, stepping back from the edge of the curb to avoid the splash of passing tires. Chloe stood a few feet away. She was shivering, her thin silk dress completely inadequate for the plunging temperature. She had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, the massive diamond hidden in the folds of her coat. The silence between us was ugly. It wasn't the quiet of the restaurant. It was the vibrating, highly pressurized silence that precedes a detonation. "You planned that," Chloe said. Her voice was barely a whisper, fighting against the sound of the rain and the traffic. I didn't look at her. I watched a cab brake hard at the intersection, its taillights flaring bright red. "Don't be ridiculous, Chloe. Don't talk to me like I'm one of your criminals," she snapped, turning toward me. The veneer was entirely gone now. Her face was twisted, ugly with raw anger. You knew who he was, and you sat there and let me treat you like a secretary. You let Preston make a fool of himself. You set us up." I finally turned my head. I looked at my sister. The street lamp cast harsh, downward shadows on her face, highlighting the deep lines of exhaustion around her eyes. "I didn't set you up, Chloe," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the judicial modulation I usually relied on. "I just didn't correct you." "Why?" Her voice cracked, a desperate, reedy sound. "Why didn't you just tell me? Hey, Chloe, guess what? I'm a federal judge now. Why keep it a secret?" "It wasn't a secret," I barked back, the anger finally flaring hot in my chest. The sudden volume of my voice made a nearby couple turn and stare, but I didn't care. "It was in the goddamn newspaper, Chloe. The Senate confirmed me on live television. Mom and Dad have a framed photo of my swearing-in ceremony in their living room. You literally had to try to not know." Chloe flinched, stepping back as if I had physically shoved her. "I didn't keep it a secret," I continued, stepping closer, the rain soaking into my hair. "You just never asked. You never asked about my job. You never asked about my life. For 2 years, every time we spoke, it was about your divorce, your blog, your new boyfriend, your ring, your wedding. You decided I was a miserable, low-level bureaucrat because it made you feel better about yourself. It made you feel like you were winning." "That's not true," she choked out, but her eyes dropped to the wet pavement. "It is true," I said softly. The anger drained out of me as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind that familiar, hollow exhaustion. "And I let you believe it, because fighting for your attention is exhausting. Explaining my life to someone who desperately wants to misunderstand it is exhausting. It was just easier to let you have the spotlight. You always needed it more than I did." A violent shiver ripped through Chloe's body. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "He looked at me like I was garbage." "Who? Preston?" "Arthur," she whispered, her voice breaking. A single tear escaped, cutting a pale track through her makeup. "Preston's dad. When I made that comment about you being alone, he looked at me like I was something pathetic." "You were being pathetic," I said honestly. "No padding, no legal maneuvering, just the brutal, unvarnished truth. You tried to tear me down to make yourself look bigger in front of him. But Arthur Kensington is a man who deals in facts. He saw exactly what you were doing, and he didn't respect it." Chloe let out a jagged, wet sob. She didn't try to hide it. She stood in the freezing rain, crying, the picture of absolute, terrifying vulnerability. The expensive ring, the designer dress, the carefully curated social media life, none of it mattered. She was just a terrified woman realizing the ground beneath her was made of sand. "Is Preston going to leave me?" she asked, looking up at me like a lost child. I looked at my sister. The instinct to comfort her, to lie to her and tell her everything would be fine, pulled at my chest. It was a muscle memory built over 30 years, but I was tired of lying. "I don't know, Chloe," I said, my voice tired and heavy. "Preston is weak. He derives his identity from his father, and tonight you embarrassed him in front of his father. If he stays, he's going to hold this over you for a very long time." Chloe closed her eyes, tilting her head back against the rain. She didn't argue. She didn't defend him. She knew I was right. A silver sedan pulled up to the curb. The valet stepped out, leaving the engine running, the headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. "That's me," I said. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, handing it to the valet. I opened the driver's side door. The interior of my car smelled like old coffee and the cheap vanilla air freshener I had hung on the rearview mirror months ago. It was a perfectly ordinary car. "Becca," Chloe called out. I paused. 1 foot inside the car, the rain plastering my hair to my forehead, I looked back over the roof of the sedan. Chloe was standing under the awning now, shivering, looking incredibly small. I'm sorry." She didn't specify what she was sorry for. The comment at the table, the years of willful ignorance, the sheer arrogance of assuming my life was smaller than hers. It was an incomplete apology, fractured and inadequate. But it was real. For the first time in maybe 20 years, my sister was looking at me and actually seeing me. "I know," I said. I got into the car and pulled the door shut. The heavy thud sealed out the sound of the rain and the traffic. I sat there in the quiet for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The leather was cold against my palms. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb, merging into the glowing red stream of traffic. I didn't check the rearview mirror to see if she was still standing there. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythmic pulse against the glass, clearing the water away, second by second, mile by mile. Rebecca, Chloe, Preston, have you ever had a moment where someone underestimated you, only to realize exactly who they were dealing with? The truth always reveals itself, and sometimes silence is the loudest answer you can give. If you loved this deep dive into family drama, ego, and quiet vindication, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs a good story, and don't forget to subscribe for more raw, emotional storytelling. See you in the next one.